Welcome back for Chapter 4 of The Secret Garden, and because the last chapter was so short and didn't need much discussion, I'm probably tacking this on to the same video. Chapter 4, Martha. When she opened her eyes in the morning, it was because a young housemaid had come into her room to light the fire and was kneeling on the hearth rug, raking out the cinders noisily. Mary lay and watched her for a few moments and then began to look about the room. She had never seen a room at all like it and thought it curious and gloomy. The walls were covered with tapestry with a forest scene embroidered on it. There were fantastically dressed people under the trees, and in the distance there was a glimpse of the turrets of a castle. There were hunters and horses and dogs and ladies. Mary felt as if she were in the forest with them. Out of the deep windows she could see a great climbing stretch of land which seemed to have no trees on it and to look rather like an endless dull purplish sea. "What is that?" she said, pointing out the window. Martha, the young housemaid, who had just risen to her feet, looked and pointed also. "That there?" she said. "Yes, that's the moor," with a good-natured grin. "Does thee like it?" "No," answered Mary. "I hate it." Man, Mary's... That's 'cause thou'rt not used to it. I have no clue what accent Martha's supposed to have. Most of her words are completely spelled, so it's probably not the Yorkshire that they were doing earlier, but every now and then they're just randomly going to something I would expect out of like a bad attempt at Shakespeare or a Thor comic. "That's 'cause thou'rt not used to it," Martha said, going back to her hearth. "Thee thinks it's too big and bare now, but thou will like it." "Do you?" inquired Mary. "Ah, that I do," answered Martha, cheerfully polishing away at the grate. "I just love it. It's not bare. It's covered with growing things that smell sweet. I'm currently going with like a country American accent. We're just rolling with it. I just love it. It's not bare. It's covered with growing things that smell sweet. It's fair lovely in spring and summer, and gorse and broom and heather and flowers. Smells of honey, and there's such a lot of fresh air, and the sky looks so high, and the bees and skylarks make it such a nice noise, humming and singing. I wouldn't live away from more for anything." Mary listened to her with a grave, puzzled expression. The native servants she had been used to in India were not in the least like this. They were obsequious and servile. God damn it. Oh boy. Okay, we'll back this later. Let's just read it. "They were obsequious and servile and did not presume to talk to their masters as if they were equals." Oh, God help me. "They made salams and called them protector of the poor and names of that sort. Indian servants were commanded to do things, not asked. It was not the custom to say please and thank you, and Mary had always slapped her ayah in the face when she was angry." She wondered a little what this girl would do if one slapped her in the face. She was a round, rosy, good-natured looking creature, but she had a sturdy way which made Mistress Mary wonder if she might not even slap back, if the person who slapped her was only a little girl. "Oh, wow. Okay. Oh, no. You're a strange servant," she said from her pillows rather haughtily. Martha sat up on her heels with her blacking brush in her hand and laughed without seeming the least out of temper. "I know that," she said. "If there was a grand missus at Misselthwaite, I should never have been even one of the under housemaids. I might have been let to the scullery maid, but I never would have been let upstairs. I'm too common to talk too much Yorkshire." Okay, I suppose it's supposed to be Yorkshire. She just spells her words correct. I don't know. "But this is a funny house for all its grand. Seems like there's neither master nor mistress except Mr. Pitcher and Mrs. Medlock. Mr. Craven, he won't be troubling about anything where he's here, and he's nearly always away. Mrs. Medlock gave me the place out of kindness. She told me she'd never have done it if Misselthwaite had been like other big houses." "Are you going to be my servant?" Mary asked, still in her imperious little Indian way. Martha began to rub her grate again. "I'm Mrs. Medlock's servant," she said stoutly, and she's Mr. Craven's, but I'm to do the housemaid's work up here and wait on you a bit. But you won't need much waiting on. Who's going to dress me? Demanded Mary. Martha sat up on her heels again and stared. She spoke in broad Yorkshire in her amazement. Can't I do the dress myself? What do you mean? I don't understand your language, said Mary. Mary's not alone. I forgot, Martha said. Mrs. Medlock told me I have to be careful or you wouldn't know what I was saying. I mean, can't you put on your own clothes? No, answered Mary, quite indignantly. I never did in my life. My ayah dressed me, of course. Well, Martha said, evidently not in the least aware that she was impudent, it's time thou should learn. If thou cannot begin younger, it'll do thee good to wait on the sen a bit. My mother always said she couldn't see why grand people's children didn't turn out fair fools, that with nursing and being washed and dressed and taken out a walk as if they was puppies. It is different in India, said Mistress Mary disdainfully. She could scarcely stand this. But Martha was not at all crushed. I can't see that it's different, she answers almost sympathetically. I dare say it's because there's such a lot of blacks that there's... Zeus f***ing a pogo stick, this book. This f***ing book. Oh, why did I start with this book? I dare say it's because there's such a lot of blacks there instead of respectable white people. When I heard you was coming from India, I thought you was a black too. Mary sat up in bed furious. What? She said. What? You thought I was a native? You daughter of a pig? Martha stared and looked hot. Who are you calling names? She said. You needn't be so vexed. That's not the way for a young lady to talk. I'm nothing against the blacks, but when you read about 'em in tracts, they're always very religious. That went a direction I wasn't expecting. Okay. You always read as a black's a man of the brother, and I never seen a black, and I was fair pleased to think I was going to see one close. When I came in to light your fire this morning, I was crept up to your bed and pulled the cover back carefully to look at you, and there you was, disappointedly. No more black than me, for all you're so yeller. How many more pages is this chapter? Oh, it's a long one. Mary did not even try to control her rage and humiliation. You thought I was a native? You dared? You don't know anything about natives. They're not people. They're servants who must salaam to you. You must know nothing about India. You know nothing about anything. She was in such a rage and felt so helpless before the girl's simple stare, and somehow she suddenly felt so horribly lonely and far away from everything she understood and which understood her, that she threw herself face downward on the pillows and burst into passionate sobbing. She sobbed so unrestrainedly that good-natured Yorkshire Martha was a little frightened and quite sorry for her. She went to the bed and bent over her. You mustn't cry like that there, she begged. You mustn't for sure. You don't know you'd be vexed. I don't know anything about anything, just like you said. I beg your pardon, miss. Do stop crying. There was something comforting and really friendly in her queer Yorkshire speech and sturdy way which had good effect on Mary. She gradually ceased crying and became quiet. Martha looked relieved. It's time for thee to get up now, she said. Mrs. Medlock said I was to carry the breakfast and tea and dinner into the room next to this. It's been made into a nursery for thee. I'll help thee on this with thy clothes if you'll get out of bed, and the buttons or the back that cannot button them up thyself. When Mary at last decided to get up, the clothes Martha took from the wardrobe were not the ones she had worn when she arrived the night before with Mrs. Medlock. Those are not mine, she said. Mine are black. She looked at thick white wool coat and dress over and added with cool approval, those are nicer than mine. These are the ones must put on, Martha answered. Mr. Craven ordered Mr. Medlock to get 'em in London. He said, I won't have a child dressed in black wandering about like a lost soul, he said. It'd make the place sadder than it is. Put color on her. Martha, she said she knew what he meant. Mother, she said she knew what he meant. Mother always knows what a body means. She doesn't hold that with black herself. I hate black things, said Mary. Given the last few paragraphs, that's kind of an odd context. The dressing process was one which taught them both something. Martha had buttoned up, her little sister and brothers before she had never seen a child who stood still and waited for another person to do things for her as if she had neither hands nor feet of her own. "Why doesn't they put on their own shoes?" she said, when Mary quietly held out her feet. "My ayah did it," answered Mary, staring. "It was the custom." She said that very often. It was the custom. The native servants were always saying it. If one told them to do things their ancestors had not done for 1,000 years, she gazed at one mildly and said, "It is not the custom," and one knew that was the end of the matter. It had not been the custom that Mistress Mary should do anything but stand and allow herself to be dressed like a doll, but before she was ready for breakfast, she began to suspect that her life at Misselthwaite Manor would end by teaching her a number of things quite new to her. Things such as putting on her own shoes and stockings and picking up things she let fall. If Martha had been a well-trained, fine young lady's maid, she would have been more subservient and respectful, and would have known that it was her business to brush hair and button boots and pick things up and lay them away. She was, however, only an untrained Yorkshire rustic who had been brought up in a moorland cottage with a swarm of little brothers and sisters who had never dreamed of doing anything but waiting on themselves and on the younger ones who were either babies in arms or just learning to totter about and tumble over things. Yay, classism instead of racism! If Mary Lennox had been a child who was ready to be amused, she would perhaps have laughed at Martha's readiness to talk, but Mary only listened to her coldly and wondered at her freedom of manner. At first she was not at all interested, but gradually, as the girls rattled on her good-tempered, homely way, Mary began to notice that she was saying, You should have seen 'em all," she said. "There's 12 of us, and my father's only get 16 shillin' a week. I can tell you my mother's putting on to get porridge for 'em all. They stumble about in the moor and play there and all day, and mother says the air of the moors fatten 'em. She says she believes they eat the grass the same as the wild ponies do. Our Dickon, he's 12 years old. He's got a young pony he calls his own." I am still sorry to anyone from Yorkshire who's hearing me try I'm so sorry. I feel like I hit it every 20th word, but... "Where did he get it?" asked Mary. "He found it in the moor with the other mother when he was a little one, and began to make friends with him and give him bits of bread or pluck grass for it, and it got to it like him, so it follows him about and lets him get on its back. Dickon's kind of a lad in animals like him." Okay, what are they actually saying? Mary had never possessed an animal pet of her own and had always thought she should like one. So she began to feel slightly interested in Dickon, and as she had never before been interested in anyone but herself, it was the dawning of a healthy sentiment. When she went into the room, which had been made into the nursery for her, she found that it was rather like the one she had slept in. It was not a child's room, but a grown-up person's room, with the gloomy old pictures on the walls and heavy old oak chairs. A table in the center was set with a good substantial breakfast, but she had always had a very small appetite, and she looked with something more than indifference at the first plate Martha set before her. "I don't want it," she said. "Doesn't want the porridge?" Martha exclaimed incredulously. "No." "That doesn't know how good it is. Bit of treacle on it and a bit of sugar." "I don't want it," Mary repeated. Said Martha. "Can't abide to see good victuals go to waste. If our children was at this table, they'd clean it bare in 5 minutes." "Why?" Mary coldly. "Why?" echoed Martha. "'Cause they scarce ever had their stomachs full in their lives. They're as hungry as young hawks and foxes." "I don't know what it is to be hungry," said Mary with indifference of ignorance. Martha looked indignant. "Well, it would do thee good to try it. I can see the plain enough," she said outspokenly. "I've no patience with folks that sit and just stares at good bread and meat, and my word, don't I wish Dickon and Phil and Jane and the rest of 'em had what's under their pinafores. Why don't you take it to them?" suggested Mary. "It's not mine," answered Martha stoutly, "and this ain't my day out. I get my day out once a month, same as the rest. Then I go home and clean up for Mother and give her a day's rest." Mary drank some tea and ate a little toast and some marmalade. "You wrap up warm and run out and play, you," Martha said. "It'll do you good and give you some stomach for your meat." Mary went to the window. There were gardens and paths and big trees, but everything looked dull and wintry. Out? Why would I go out on a day like this? Well, if it doesn't go out, that'll have to stay in. What have I got to do? Mary glanced about her. There was nothing to do. When Mrs. Medlock had prepared the nursery, she had not thought of amusement. Perhaps it would be better to go and see what the gardens were like. Gardens again. Who will go with me? She inquired. Martha stared. Go by yourself, she answered. You have to learn to play like other children does when they doesn't got sisters and brothers. Our Dickon got off in the moor and by himself and played for hours. That's how he made friends with the pony. He's got sheep in the moor that knows him and birds and come and eat out of his hand. However little there is to eat, he always saves a bit of bread for the cooks and his pets. It was really this mention of Dickon which made Mary decide to go out. Though she was not aware of it, there would be birds outside, though there would not be ponies or sheep. They would be different from birds in India, and it might amuse her to look at them. Martha found her coat and hat for her and a pair of stout little boots, and she showed her her way downstairs. If the goes around that way, they'll come to the gardens, she said, pointing to a gate in a wall of shrubbery. There's lots of flowers in summertime, but there's nothing blooming now. She seemed to hesitate a second before she added, One of the gardens is locked up. No one has been in it for 10 years. Why? Asked Mary in spite of herself. Here was another locked door added to the hundred in the strange house. Mr. Craven said it shut when his wife died so sudden. He won't let no one go inside. It was her garden. He locked the door and dug a hole and buried the key. There's Miss Medlock's bell ringing. I must run. After she was gone, Mary turned down the walk which led to the door to the shrubbery. She could not help thinking about the garden which no one had been into for 10 years. She wondered what it would look like, and whether there were any flowers still alive in it. When she had passed through the shrubbery gate, she found herself in great gardens, with wide lawns and winding walks. With clipped borders, there were trees and flower beds and evergreens clipped into strange shapes and large pool with an old gray fountain in its midst. But the flower beds were bare and wintry, and the fountain was not playing. This was not the garden which was shut up. How could a garden be shut up? You could always walk into a garden. She was just thinking this when she saw that at the end of the path she was following there seemed to be a long wall with ivy growing over it. She was not familiar enough with England to know that she was coming upon the kitchen gardens where the vegetables and fruit were growing. She went toward the wall and found that there was a green door in the ivy, that it stood open. This was not the closed garden, evidently, and she could go into it. She went through the door and found that it was a garden with walls all around it, that it was only one of several walled gardens which seemed to open into one another. She saw another open green door, revealing bushes and pathways between beds containing winter vegetables. Fruit trees were trained flat against the wall, and over some of the beds there were glass frames. The place was bare and ugly enough, Mary thought, as she stood and stared about her. It might be nicer in summer when things were green, but there was nothing pretty about it now. Presently an old man with a spade over his shoulder walked through the door leading from the second garden. He looked startled when he saw Mary and then touched his cap. He said he had a surly old face and did not seem at all pleased to see her, but then she was quite displeased with his garden and wore her quite contrary expression and certainly did not seem at all pleased to see him. What is this place? She asked. One of the kitten gardens, he answered. What is that? Said Mary, pointing through the other green door. Another of 'em, shortly. There's another on the other side of the wall, and then there's the orchard to the other side of that. Can I go in them? Said Mary. If thou likes, but there's not to see. Mary made no response. She went down the path and through the second green door. There she found more walls and more winter vegetables and glass frames. But in the second wall there was another green door, and it was not open. Perhaps it led into the garden which no one had seen for 10 years. And as she was not at all timid child and always did what she wanted to do, Mary went to the green door and turned the handle. She hoped the door would not open because she wanted to be sure she had found the mysterious garden. But it did open quite easily, and she walked through it and found herself in an orchard. There were walls all around it also, and a tree trained against them, and there were bare fruit trees growing in the winter brown grass. But there was no green door to be seen anywhere. Mary looked for it, and yet when she had entered the upper end of the garden, she had noticed that the wall did not seem to end with the orchard, but to extend beyond it as if it were enclosed a place at the other side. She could see the tops of trees above the wall, and when she stood still, she saw a bird with a bright red breast sitting on the topmost branch of one of them. And suddenly he burst into his winter song, almost as if he had caught sight of her and was calling to her. She stopped and listened to him, and somehow his cheerful, friendly little whistle gave her a pleased feeling. Even a disagreeable little girl may be lonely, and the big closed house and big bare moor and big bare gardens had made this one feel as if there was no one left in the world but herself. If she had been an affectionate child who had been used to being loved, he would have broken her heart. But even though she was Mistress Mary quite contrary, she was desolate, and the bright-breasted little girl brought a look into her little sour... Run-on sentence, okay. If she had been an affectionate child who had been used to being loved, he would have broken her heart. But even though she was Mistress Mary quite contrary, she was desolate, and the bright-breasted little bird which brought a look into her sour little face which was almost a smile. She listened to him until he flew away. He was not an Indian bird, and she liked him and wondered if she would ever see him again. Perhaps he lived in the mysterious garden and knew all about it. Perhaps it was because she had nothing whatever to do that she thought so much of the deserted garden. She was curious about it and wanted to see what it was like. Why had Mr. Archibald Craven buried the key? If he had liked his wife so much, why did he hate her garden? She wondered if she could ever see him, but she knew that if she did, she would not like him, and he would not like her, and that she would only stand and stare at him and say nothing, though she would be wanting dreadfully to ask him why he had done such a queer thing. People never like me, and I never like people, she thought, and I never can talk as the Crawford children could. They were always talking and laughing and making noises. She thought of the robin and of the way he seemed to sing his song at her. As she remembered the treetop he perched on, she stopped rather suddenly on the path. I believe that tree was in the secret garden. I feel sure it was. And there was a wall around the place, and there was no door. She walked back into the first kitchen garden she had entered, and found the old man digging there. She went and stood beside him and watched him a few moments in her cold little way. He took no notice of her, so at last she spoke to him. "I've been into the other gardens," she said. "There's nothing to prevent thee," he answered crustily. "I went into the orchard." "There's no dog at the door to bite thee," he answered. "There was no door there into the other garden," said Mary. "What garden?" he said in a rough voice, stopping his digging for a moment. Oh, now you tell me he has a rough voice, like 4 pages later. "The one on the other side of the wall," answered Mistress Mary. "There are trees there. I saw the tops of them, and a bird with a red breast was sitting on one of them, and he sang." To her surprise, the surly old weather-beaten face actually changed its expression. A slow smile spread over it, and the gardener looked quite different. It made her think that it was curious how much nicer a person looked when he smiled. She had not thought of it before. He turned about to the orchard side of his garden and began to whistle, a low, soft whistle. She could not understand how such a surly man would make such a coaxing sound. Almost the next moment, a wonderful thing happened. She heard a soft little rushing flight through the air, and it was the bird with the red breast flying to them, and he actually alighted on the big clod of earth quite near to the gardener's foot. "Here he is," chuckled the old man, and then he spoke to the bird as if it were speaking to a child. "Where has thee been, thee cheeky little beggar?" he said. "I've not seen thee before today. Has begun to courting this early in the season? Too forward." The bird put its tiny head on one side and looked up at him with its soft, bright eye, which was like a black dewdrop. He seemed quite familiar and not the least afraid. He dropped about and pecked the earth briskly, looking for seed and insect. It actually gave Mary a queer feeling in her heart, because she was so pretty and cheerful and seemed so like a person. He had a tiny, plump body and delicate beak and slender, delicate legs. "Will he always come when you call him?" she asked almost in a whisper. Aye, that he will. I've known him ever since he was a fledgling. He came out of the nest in the garden, and when he first flew over the wall, he was too weak to fly back for a few days and got friendly. When he went over the wall again, the rest of the brood, he was gone, he was lonely, and he came back to me." "What kind of a bird is he?" Mary asked. "Doesn't it know? He's a robin redbreast. They're the friendliest, curious birds alive. There's always almost friendly as dogs, if you know how to get on with them. Watch him pecking about there and looking around at us now and again. He knows we're talking about him. It was the queerest thing in the world to see the old fellow. He looked at the plump little scarlet waistcoated bird as if he were both proud and fond of him. He's a conceited one, chuckled. He likes to hear folks talk about him, and curious, bless me, there's never was like him for curiosity and meddling. He's always coming to see what I'm planting. He knows all things Master Craven never troubles himself to find out. He's the head of the gardener, he is. The robin hopped about, busily pecking the soil, and then stopped and looked at them a little. Mary thought his black dewdrop eyes gazed at her with great curiosity. It really seemed as if he were finding out all about her. The queer feeling in her heart increased. Where did the rest of the brood fly to? He asked. There's no knowing. The old ones turn 'em out in the nest and make 'em fly, and they're scattered before you know it. This one was knowing one, and he knew he was lonely. Mistress Mary went a step nearer to the robin and looked at it very hard. I'm lonely, she said. I'm sorry, that's just, I had to do that voice. I'm lonely, she said. She had not known before that this was one of the things that made her feel sour and cross. She seemed to find it out when the robin looked at her, and she looked at the robin. The old gardener pushed his cap back in his bald head and stared at her a minute. That the little wench from India? He asked. Mary nodded. Them no wonder they're lonely. They'll be lonelier before that's done, he said. He began to dig again, driving a spade deep into the rich black garden soil while the robin hopped about very busily employed. What's your name? Mary inquired. He stood up to answer her. Ben Weatherstaff, he answered. Then he added with a surly chuckle, I'm lonely myself, except when he's with me. And he jerked his thumb toward the robin. He's the only friend I've got. I have no friends at all, said Mary. I never have. My ayah didn't like me, and I never played with anyone. It's a Yorkshire habit to say what you think with blunt frankness, and old Ben Weatherstaff was a Yorkshire moorman. Then me or good bit alack, he said. We was wove out of the same cloth. We're neither of us good-looking, and we're both of us as sour as we look. We got the same nasty tempers, both of us, I'll warrant. This was plain speaking, and Mary Lennox had never heard the truth about herself in her life. Native servants always salaamed and submitted to her, whatever you did. She had never thought much about her looks, but she wondered if she was as unattractive as Ben Weatherstaff, and she also wondered if she looked as sour as he had looked before the robin came. She actually began to wonder if she was nasty-tempered. She felt uncomfortable. Suddenly, a clear, rippling little sound broke out near her, and she turned around. She was standing a few feet from a young apple tree, and the robin had flown to one of its branches and had burst out into a scrap of song. Ben Weatherstaff laughed outright. What did he do that for? Mary asked. He's made up his mind to make friends with thee, replied Ben. Dang me if he hasn't took a fancy to me, said Mary. She moved towards the little tree softly and looked up. Would you make friends with me? She said to the robin, just as if she was speaking to a person. Would you? She did not say it either in her hard little voice or in the imperious Indian voice, but in a tone so soft and eager and coaxing that Ben Weatherstaff was as surprised as she had been when she heard him whistle. Why, he cried out, they said that as nice as a human that was a real little child instead of that sharp old woman. They said almost like Dickon talks to his wild things in the moor. Do you know Dickon? Mary asked, turning around rather in a hurry. Everybody knows him. Dickon's wandering about everywhere. The very blackberries and heatherbells knows him. I warrant the foxes shows him where the cubs lie, and the skylarks doesn't hide their nest from 'em. Mary would have liked to ask some more questions. She was always as curious about Dickon as she was about the deserted garden. But just that moment, the robin who had ended his song gave a little shake of his wings, spread them, and flew away. He had made his visit and had other things to do. He's flown over the wall, Mary cried out, watching him. He's flown into the orchard. He's flown across the other wall into the garden where there's no door. He lives there, said old Ben. He came out of the egg there, and if he's courting, he's making up some young madam of a robin that lives among the old rose trees there. Rose trees, said Mary. Are there rose trees? Ben Weatherstaff took up his spade again and began to dig. "It was 10 years ago," he mumbled. "I should like to see him," said Mary. "Where's the green door? There must be a door somewhere." Ben drove his spade deep and looked as uncompanionable as he looked when she first saw him. "It was 10 years ago. There isn't now," he said. "No door? There must be. None as anyone can find, and none as anyone's business. Don't you be a meddlesome wench and poke your nose where it's no cause to go. Here, I must go on with my work. Get you going and play. You have no more time." He actually stopped digging, threw his spade over his shoulder, and walked off, without even glancing at her or saying goodbye. Okay, that was a roller coaster. Or we've got classism, we've got a lot of racism, we've got Yorkshire accents. Exciting! Hi there, YouTube. Please ignore the sudden scenery change. In the 2 weeks since recording the last chapter and now analyzing it, I have been through a major move to a new house. Welcome to my home, and let's get started on the secret chapter, if I can remember what was actually happening. All right, there was a lot of racism. I remember that. We're warriors, unstoppable. We can find a mind of strength and never let it go. We must be strong. We must be brave. We can find a bit of strength and let it go. We must be strong. Okay, right. So, super problematic talk with the nurse, in which we basically establish, her normal world of being a little baby tyrant is over, and then she wanders the house, finds the orchards, but not the secret garden. Finally, she talks with the gardener. It is iconically similar to her in many regards, of being sort of a miserable person, but also has like positive traits of happiness sometimes about gardening and talking to the bird, super symbolic bird. Right, so let's get my character sheet open. Oh, also, to unpack all of the racism and really problematic stuff in the beginning of this chapter, it's bad. I don't think there's really much more to say. I mean, I'm sure there is more to say from someone who's more scholarly about this than I am, but like, it's bad. Don't be like that person, kids. Don't. All right, scene sheet. Oh crap, what was the name of this chapter? Martha, right, the nurse's name. Setting is Misselthwaite Manor. I'm totally going to guess how to spell that. I think the point of view was Omni over Mary's shoulder again. Oh, we totally skipped chapter 3. That's fair. Chapter 3 didn't really have anything going on in it. I mean, chapter 3 is really just a continuation of chapter 2. I'm not entirely sure why they're even separate chapters. But anyway, chapter 4, Martha. I think this is a set type scene. So Mary has the goal of exploring the mansion, figuring out how things are, learning what the new rules of life are going to be. Explore mansion, figure out new situation. The conflict, of course, being is that like she's not treated the same. She can no longer be a child tyrant. And the catastrophe actually in this case would be a eutastrophe, that something unexpected and good comes to disrupt things, which is the bird, which sort of gives a sign of hope that there's some good in this eutastrophe bird. Something good is in the manner. Oh, and they also like keep mentioning some boy who's good with animals, so he's obviously going to have to like be important soon, probably a love interest, because dear God, they always have to be. I hope not. Hopefully this is young enough of a book to not go there. Let's see, important plot points for Mary. Blah, blah. I should actually look at what a character sheet says about such things. Plot sheet. Oh, so this is pretty much right after the first plot point, which I guess would things are settling into the second act. This is the beginning of the second act, where she's starting to react to the changes that have come into her life. But she's still reactive. This might be the first pinch point. The bird being well, it's an odd. So usually, the pinch points is when the antagonistic force flexes or makes an appearance to reveal to the character that whatever lie they've been living with is not sustainable or true. And this, it might be, although it's a weird one because it's not an antagonistic force. It's like, well, I mean, the bird coming in and being like, hey, there's more to life than being a terrible child is the event I'm talking about. And I guess it's sort of the antagonistic force in that it's forcing her to change her ways, but it's, kind of a friendly antagonistic force. There's not enough of those in literature, nice, friendly bad guy. But I'm going to put it down with some question marks. All right, and that's it. I'll see you next week. They said that as nice as any human if that was... Oh, God, just trying to read this accent. Kenna the dress and the sin? When he went over the wall of the rest of the brood, he was in... When... Wow, that's a lot of, words without vowels in them. Okay. There's one who's no and one and new and is lonely. You want me to what with a pogo stick? Because I'm totally down for it.